My career almost ended because of 2 words. Not a financial mistake, not a failed presentation, not a leaked company secret. Just 2 stupid, completely misplaced words that slipped out in front of more than 500 employees during our company's biggest live meeting of the year, my love. The moment they left my mouth, every square on the video conference froze faces that had been busy taking notes, suddenly stared at me through their webcams. Someone's microphone crackled. Somewhere in the participant list, a notification chimed, and directly in the center of my screen, sitting alone at the head of the virtual boardroom, was Elena Sinclair, the woman every business magazine called the Ice Queen of Wall Street. She didn't blink. She didn't frown. She simply looked at me with those pale gray eyes that had made Vice presidents forget their own names during quarterly reviews. My blood turned to ice 5 seconds earlier. My phone had buzzed beside my laptop. My girlfriend had texted asking if I was still coming over after work. I had reached for the phone without thinking while still sharing my presentation. I thought my microphone was muted. It wasn't. Instead of quietly replying to her message, I had spoken directly into the company's global meeting. Give me 10 minutes, my love. Silence swallowed the room. I watched the participant count in the corner, 523. Every single one of them had heard it. The HR director lowered her glasses. The CFO looked like he was trying not to laugh. Someone accidentally turned on their camera before hurriedly switching it off again. I wanted the earth to open beneath my chair. For 3 years, I'd worked at Sinclair Global as a senior strategy analyst. I had survived impossible deadlines, brutal acquisitions, and Elena Sinclair's terrifying performance reviews. But this was career suicide. My cursor hovered over the leave meeting button. Maybe disappearing forever was still an option. Then Elena leaned forward slightly. The movement was so small that most people probably missed it. I didn't, because for the first time since I'd joined the company, I saw the corner of her mouth lift. Not a full smile, just enough to make the room even quieter. She folded her hands together. Mr. Carter. Her voice was calm, controlled, dangerously soft. I swallowed. Yes, Miss Sinclair. She held my gaze through the camera. You seem to have started a sentence. Another pause. Finish it. A nervous laugh escaped somewhere in the meeting before dying instantly. No one moved. No one dared. My heart hammered so hard I could hear it in my ears. Every instinct screamed at me to apologize, to blame bad audio, to pretend someone else had spoken. But something in her expression stopped me. She wasn't mocking me. She was testing me. I took a slow breath. I'm afraid, I said carefully. The rest of that sentence wasn't intended for a shareholder presentation. Another second of silence. Then something impossible happened. Elena Sinclair actually laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. Just one short, genuine laugh that disappeared, almost as quickly as it arrived. Half the executives looked like they'd just witnessed a solar eclipse. I imagine it wasn't, she replied. Her face returned to its usual professional calm. Fortunately for you, Mr. Carter, today's agenda concerns international expansion rather than your personal vocabulary. A wave of relieved laughter swept through the meeting people. Relaxed shoulders dropped. Someone even muted themselves while chuckling. She glanced toward the presentation still frozen behind me. Now, unless your strategic proposal also intends to call our investors my love, perhaps we should continue. Even I laughed, mostly because I was still alive. I somehow finished the presentation without remembering a single word I'd said. When the meeting finally ended, I remained frozen in my chair. My hands were shaking. My inbox exploded before I'd even closed the conference. Software messages arrived every few seconds. Bro, are you alive? Legend. Did that seriously just happen? HR wants to see you. The last message made my stomach drop. Of course they did. I stood, straightened my tie, and started walking toward the executive floor like a man heading toward his own execution. Before I reached HR, my phone buzzed again. One new notification, Elena Sinclair. For a second I thought I was hallucinating. The CEO had never messaged me directly ever. With trembling hands I opened it. There was only one sentence, "Come to my office alone." If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to like the video and subscribe, because what happened behind that office door changed far more than my career. The walk from my department to the executive floor normally took less than 3 minutes. That afternoon, it felt like the longest journey of my life. Every employee I passed suddenly found a reason to look at me. Some smiled, some whispered. Others pretended not to notice me, while very obviously noticing me. News traveled faster than company emails. By the time I reached the top floor, everyone already knew about the meeting. Elena's assistant, Grace, looked up as I approached. Usually she wore the same perfectly composed expression as her boss. Today she looked almost sympathetic. "She's expecting you," she said quietly. Then, after a tiny pause, "Good luck." Those 2 words did absolutely nothing to calm my nerves. I knocked once. "Come in." The voice was as composed as ever. I stepped inside. Elena's office overlooked the entire city through floor-to-ceiling windows, sunlight reflected off the surrounding skyscrapers, filling the room with silver light. Everything was immaculate, the shelves, the artwork, the polished walnut desk, and behind it sat the woman I'd accidentally called my love in front of half the company. She didn't immediately look up. Instead, she finished signing a document, placed the pen beside it with perfect precision, then finally lifted her eyes toward me. "Close the door, Mr. Carter." I obeyed. The click of the lock echoed through the office. For several seconds she simply studied, not speaking, not smiling, just observing. I wondered if this was her favorite way of making people confess, before she'd even asked a question. Finally, she broke the silence. "You looked ready to resign during that meeting." I was considering escaping. "The country?" A tiny spark appeared in her eyes. I appreciate honesty. I figured lying probably wouldn't improve my situation. "No," she admitted. "It wouldn't." To my surprise, she stood and walked away from her desk instead of remaining behind it. Without the furniture between us, she somehow felt even more intimidating. She stopped beside the window. "The board expected me to humiliate you." She said quietly. I frowned. "They've become accustomed to believing that fear is good leadership." She looked out across the skyline. "I disagree." That answer caught me completely off guard. "I appreciate that." She turned toward me again. "Don't do." "You know why I asked you to finish your sentence?" I shook my head because panic reveals character. Her voice softened almost imperceptibly. Most people invent excuses. "You didn't." I figured I'd already embarrassed myself enough. Another, almost smile barely visible. "You did then?" After a brief pause. "But you also made 500 employees laugh during the most stressful quarterly meeting we've had all year." I stared at her. I hadn't thought of it that way. "I know," she folded her arms loosely, "which is why I'm telling you." For the first time since entering the office, my heartbeat finally began slowing down. Maybe I wasn't getting fired after all. Then she asked something I never expected. "Who was she?" I blinked. "Excuse me?" "The woman you intended to call my love?" There wasn't jealousy in her voice, only curiosity. "My girlfriend." She nodded once. I hope she appreciated the sentiment more than my shareholders did. A laugh escaped before I could stop it, to my complete surprise. She laughed too, only for a second. But this time it reached her eyes, and in that brief moment, the woman everyone feared disappeared. Standing in front of me wasn't the legendary CEO. She was simply someone who looked unbelievably tired. Beneath years of perfect composure, Then her office phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID. The warmth vanished instantly. Her shoulders straightened. The Ice Queen returned. "You should get back to work." "Mr. Carter." I nodded. "Thank you for not firing me." As I reached the door, her voice stopped me one last time. "Mr. Carter." I turned. "If you ever accidentally embarrass yourself again." A tiny smile touched her lips. "Try not to. Do it in front of the entire company." When I stepped back into the hallway, Grace looked at my face, then toward the closed office door. "You're smiling," she said, "I think." I answered honestly, "I'm still employed." What I didn't know was that by the next morning, the entire company would believe something very different, and once the rumors started, neither Elena nor I would be able to stop them. The rumors started before I even reached my desk the next morning, not loud enough to be obvious, just quiet enough to be dangerous. Corporate gossip had its own strange rhythm. It didn't spread through announcements or emails. It traveled in unfinished conversations, lingering glances, and sudden silences whenever the person being discussed happened to walk by. As the elevator doors opened onto the strategy floor, two analysts standing beside the coffee machine stopped talking at exactly the same time. One of them smiled. The other suddenly became fascinated by the vending machine. I didn't need anyone to tell me what they had been discussing. It was written all over their faces. My phone buzzed. It wasn't Elena. It was my best friend at work. Noah, meeting room B. Now I found him waiting inside with 2 paper cups of coffee already sitting on the table. He pushed one toward me before I even sat down. "You've become famous." I was hoping for invisible. Too late. He leaned back in his chair. "The accounting department says you're secretly dating the CEO." I nearly inhaled hot coffee. "What?" "The legal team believes she recruited you from another company years ago." I stared. "The marketing department thinks you're her nephew." "My." "What?" He shrugged. "I didn't say the rumors were intelligent." I rubbed both hands over my face. "This is unbelievable." "No," he smiled. "This is corporate America." I couldn't argue with that. By lunchtime, the story had evolved again. Apparently, had received special treatment. Apparently, the CEO had smiled at me because we'd known each other for years. Apparently, I'd been promoted already. Someone even claimed they'd seen me leave the executive floor looking far too relaxed. If only they knew I'd spent half the meeting imagining unemployment. The afternoon passed in a blur of spreadsheets and unanswered questions. Around 4 o'clock, my computer chimed a calendar invitation: Executive Strategy Review. Host, Elena Sinclair. Attendees, CEO, CFO, Mr. Ethan Carter. Just 3 people. No explanation, no agenda. My pulse immediately quickened again. Noah glanced over my shoulder. "You're either getting promoted," he paused dramatically, "or assassinated." I'm leaning toward the second option. 20 minutes later, I knocked on the conference room door. "Come in." The CFO was already seated, flipping through financial reports. Elena stood beside the presentation screen, wearing another perfectly tailored charcoal suit, every strand of dark hair pinned neatly into place. Yesterday's almost smiles had vanished. She looked exactly like the woman every employee feared, professional, untouchable. She acknowledged me with a single nod. "Mr. Carter." The meeting began immediately. For nearly 40 minutes we discussed expansion forecasts, market trends and acquisition risks. Nothing personal, nothing unusual. If yesterday had never happened, no one inside that room would have guessed otherwise, and yet every now and then I'd catch her looking at me. Not long enough for anyone else to notice, just long enough to make me wonder whether I'd imagined everything in her office. As the meeting ended, the CFO gathered his papers. "I'll send the revised projections tonight." "Thank you," Elena replied. He left. I followed him toward the door. "Mr. Carter." I stopped. The door closed behind the CFO. We were alone again. She walked toward the conference table and picked up the empty coffee cup I'd used. You didn't finish your coffee. I looked down, I forgot. You've done that twice. I frowned, you noticed? She met my eyes. I notice more than people think. There was no flirtation in her voice, just simple. Honesty. She placed the cup in the trash. The rumors, she finally said, ignore them. I wasn't planning on feeding them. I know. Another silence settled comfortably between us. Then she surprised me. I'm sorry. The words came so quietly. I almost thought I'd imagined them. For what? My smile yesterday. I blinked. It gave people something to talk about. I couldn't help smiling. I don't think you're responsible for office gossip. No, she admitted softly, but I am responsible. For protecting the people who work for me. For a second, she wasn't talking like a CEO. She was talking like someone carrying far more weight than anyone realized. Before I could answer, her assistant appeared at the doorway. Your board call starts in 3 minutes. The warmth disappeared from Elena's face almost instantly. She became the CEO again. We'll continue this another time. As I stepped into the hallway, I realized something. Strange, yesterday I had been terrified of her. Today I was beginning to understand her. 3 weeks passed, not dramatically, quietly. The rumors eventually faded, replaced by newer scandals and fresher gossip. But something else had begun taking their place. Routine, the kind only 2 people notice. Every Monday morning, I found a handwritten note attached to project folders. Good analysis. Nothing more. Every Wednesday evening. She'd ask one extra question after meetings, not because she needed the answer, because the conversation lasted another minute. Every Friday, without fail, she would walk past my desk on her way out of the building. She never stopped, never lingered, but she'd always ask the exact same question. Heading home, Mr. Carter. Eventually, don't work too late. I'll try. The exchange never lasted longer than 15 seconds, yet somehow it became the part of my week I looked forward to. Most, I hated admitting that to myself, one rainy Thursday evening almost. Everyone had already left when Grace hurried toward my desk, carrying 2 thick folders. Mr. Carter. She looked exhausted. Could you deliver these to Miss Sinclair? Of course. And she hesitated. Make sure she eats something. I frowned. She skipped lunch again. I looked toward the executive offices. The lights in Elena's corner office were still on despite the storm outside, turning the city almost black. I knocked gently. No answer. The door was slightly open. I stepped inside. She stood beside the window, looking down at the rain sliding across the glass. Her blazer rested over the back of a chair. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked completely unaware that anyone was watching. Just tired. Very tired. She turned as I entered. I didn't hear you. Knock. I noticed I placed the folders on her desk, and Grace asked me to make sure you actually eat dinner. A faint sigh escaped her. Grace talks too much. Only when she's worried. She looked toward the untouched sandwich sitting beside. Several unopened files I forgot. I noticed that made her smile, a real one, small, but real without thinking. I picked up the sandwich and placed it in front of her. 5 minutes. She raised one eyebrow. Excuse me? So you spend 5 minutes eating, and if I refuse, I'll stand here awkwardly until you don't. For the first time she laughed. Not politely, not briefly. Actually laughed. The sound completely transformed the room. You are surprisingly stubborn. I've been told. She finally opened the sandwich. I suppose this means you win. I wasn't aware we were competing. We are now. She took the first bite, then looked out toward the rain again. My father used to do this. I stayed quiet. He'd interrupt. Meetings just to remind me to eat. Her voice had become softer than I'd ever heard before. I thought it was annoying. She smiled faintly. I miss it now. The office suddenly felt much quieter. Not uncomfortable. Just honest. I lost him 6 years ago. I'm sorry. She nodded once. So am I. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. The rain filled the silence instead. Finally, she looked toward me. You know, her voice carried something different now. You're one of the very few people who walks into this office without wanting something. I smiled gently. I wanted you to eat dinner. She laughed again, then shook her head. No. Faithen, it was the first time she'd ever called me by my first name. That's exactly what I mean. She froze the instant she realized what she'd said. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Then her office phone lit up. The caller ID read, Board. Chairman. Her expression changed immediately. The walls came back up. Good night, Mr. Carter. The return to formality hurt more than I expected as I reached the door. I heard her answer the call. Yes, her voice was cold again, Mr. Whitmore. I didn't know it yet, but that phone call had nothing to do with quarterly profits. The board had started asking questions about me, and before long, they would force Eleanor to make a choice neither of us was ready for. The board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday by Monday afternoon. Everyone in the executive offices knew something unusual was happening. No one knew the details, but everyone felt the tension. Executives walked faster. Assistants spoke quieter. Even the elevators seemed strangely silent. I spent most of the day reviewing merger projections when Grace appeared beside my desk. Her expression told me everything before she spoke. They're questioning your promotion eligibility. I frowned. I wasn't being promoted. They think you might be. I stared at her. What? They? Believe Miss Sinclair has become emotionally compromised. The words landed like a punch to my chest. Grace lowered her voice. Someone on the board has been collecting stories. The meeting, the private strategy sessions, the late night project reviews. They've turned normal business into office politics. I leaned back slowly. So this isn't about me, she sighed. No, it's about her. That realization hurt far more than I expected. For the first time, I understood why Elena had rebuilt those walls so quickly. Every time they began to fall, every smile, every extra conversation, every moment of kindness could become ammunition. The next morning, the executive floor looked like a courtroom before sentencing board. Members arrived one after another. Luxury cars, dark suits, expensive watches. Serious faces. None of them smiled. At exactly 9 o'clock, Elena stepped out of her office. She wore a navy suit I'd never seen before. Elegant, perfectly tailored, completely unreadable. Esau nodded politely as she passed my desk. Good morning, Mr. Carter. Professional, measured, distant, exactly the way she'd greeted every employee for years. But as she reached the conference room door, she hesitated, only for half a second. Without turning around, she quietly said, "Thank you for the sandwich." Then she disappeared inside. No one else heard it, only me. The board meeting lasted almost 3 hours. The rest of us continued working, pretending not to watch the conference room every few minutes. Around noon, the doors finally opened. Executives walked out. First, some looked satisfied. Others looked irritated. Then Elena emerged. Her posture remained flawless. But I knew her well enough now to notice the exhaustion hiding behind it. She walked directly toward her office without saying a word. Grace hurried after her, carrying several folders. 5 minutes later, Grace returned. "Ethan." I stood immediately. "She wants to see you." I knocked. "Once, come in." The office felt different, quieter. The city stretched beyond the windows beneath a pale afternoon sky. Elena stood near the glass with both hands in her pockets. She didn't turn around. They offered me a choice. My stomach tightened. She continued staring outside. "They suggested transferring you to another division. Different building. No direct contact." I stayed silent. She laughed bitterly. "They called it protecting the company's reputation." Finally, she turned toward me. I said, "No." I blinked. "You." They reminded me. I answered to the board. Another pause. I reminded them that they hired me to lead this company. The room became perfectly still. I've spent years allowing people to mistake professionalism for emotional emptiness. Her voice was calm, but I refused to let them mistake integrity for weakness. I looked at her. I don't want to become a problem for you. You aren't, they are. For several long seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I smiled faintly. You. No, if none of this had happened, I never would have called you my love. She laughed softly. No. You would have remained terrified of me forever. I was terrified. Were. I've upgraded to respectfully intimidated. She shook her head, smiling despite herself. I suppose that's progress. It is a gentle silence settled between us, comfortable, honest, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. Finally I said, I've been thinking about something. She waited. I don't think what changed between us started in that meeting. Her eyes searched mine, I think, Ipong. The meeting simply forced us to notice it. For the first time since I'd met her, there were no walls in her expression. Only honesty. I've spent 2 years convincing myself that letting people close only creates opportunities for them to leave. She took one slow breath, and then someone accidentally embarrassed himself in front of 500 employees. A tiny laugh escaped both of us, and somehow reminded me that life isn't always something that has to be controlled. She stepped a little closer, not dramatically, just enough that the distance between us no longer felt professional. You once told me panic reveals character. I smiled, I remember. I've been observing yours ever since. And her eyes softened. You make people feel safe. Those words meant more than any promotion ever could. Several weeks later, the rumors finally disappeared, not because people stopped talking, because they found something new to talk about. Business moved on, quarterly reports returned, meetings resumed. Life settled back into routine, except every Friday afternoon. As Elena walked past my desk, she no longer asked, "Heading home, Mr. Carter?" Instead, she'd pause just long enough to ask, "Any dinner plans?" Sometimes I did, sometimes I didn't. Eventually, one Friday, I answered honestly, "Not yet." She looked toward the elevators. "I know a small Italian restaurant 3 blocks away." I raised an eyebrow. As CEO, she smiled. "I'm allowed to recommend restaurants. And as your employee, you may choose whether to accept the recommendation." I couldn't help laughing. I suppose I'd better not disappoint. The CEO. She tilted her head slightly. "I'm not asking, as your CEO." The sentence hung gently between us, not rushed, not dramatic, simply true. For a heartbeat, we stood there smiling like two people who had finally stopped pretending. Then, together, we walked toward the elevators, not as a CEO and her analyst, not as the subject of office gossip, just as two people who had found each other through the most embarrassing mistake imaginable. As the elevator doors closed, she glanced at me with the same tiny smile that had changed everything during that unforgettable meeting. "So she said, you never actually finished that original sentence." I laughed. "I think I finally did." She slipped her hand into mine. "I think you did too. Sometimes the biggest opportunities don't arrive through perfect timing. Sometimes they begin with 2 accidental words spoken in front of 500 horrified co-workers, and I, looking back now, calling Elena Sinclair my love wasn't the biggest mistake of my career. It was the luckiest one.